Welcome back to the channel. I have Katizuromski here. We're talking today about the number one question that all potential home buyers ask, and that is what?
How much house can I afford?
Ooh, it's a good one. There's a number of different ways that you can kind of skin a cat, so to speak, right? Katie's gonna walk through how she prepares first-time home buyers or anybody that's moving here on how she kind of formulates that question.
That's right. So I actually personally just went through this. I moved out here from Illinois with my husband, and we had to figure out our budget because the housing market out here is definitely a bit different than in Illinois.
I would agree. I have my license as a mortgage lender in Illinois, and I own a mortgage company here in Colorado. Two totally different market scenarios.
Very true. So with me and what I do with all my buyers and even my family members when they followed us out here is we set our budget. Now, how do you find that budget? There's a few key points. You want to make sure you look at your monthly income, your debt to income ratio for the household, and what your credit score is.
And what I'll do is expand a little bit on the household income. My personal take as a mortgage lender, I'm very, very risk adverse when it comes to leveraging money. I would suggest about 30% of your total income or less just to go towards your housing, payment.
I would agree with that.
Now here in Colorado, one of the reasons that we use that basic rule of thumb is because there's so much fun stuff to do out here. Yeah, so actually for BJ, Katie's husband's birthday, we went and there was like 8 of us. We all went four-wheeling, off-roading for a couple hours and then went to lunch. And that day alone was like $500. So living out here in Colorado is super awesome. But if all your money goes towards housing,
right. You want to make sure you can still live and enjoy Colorado.
Yeah. There's so many sunny days here, so you really got to get out and live life. And one of the other things that Katie mentioned was paying off debts, right?
Yep, your debt to income ratio for the household.
Right. So debt to income ratio. So one of the main things that goes into just the numbers of approving a loan is how much debt do you already have and what are those payment obligations. So as you're kind of preparing for the field, as you're kind of crunching your numbers, what you really want to figure out with your budget is, do I want to save all that money for down payment? Or if I took some of that money that I'm saving for down payment, what if I paid off debt? How does that ultimately affect how much house can you afford, as well as your overall cash flow? And what we kind of find most often is earmarking some of that down payment. So let's say you saved $50,000 for a down payment. A lot of times if you paid off your consumer debt, like your credit cards, a car payment, maybe some student loans, you can actually afford more house, even though your house payment could be a little bit more than your ideal monthly budget, that 30% rule.
I agree. That actually happened with my mother-in-law. Bob helped her out and we actually paid off her car ahead of time and she was able to afford more home.
Oh, that's right. As a matter of fact, yeah, Pam, what we ended up doing, she had a couple $1,000s left on her car payment. So we allocated some of her down payment to pay that off at closing, which freed up nearly $485, which in mortgage terms, that translated into $115,000 worth of mortgage payment she actually qualified for. Keep in mind, we kept her within her housing budget as well, but she ended up getting a far better property in my opinion.
I agree with that as well, and she absolutely loves her home.
When it comes down to how much house can I afford, it's sort of a loaded question, and you could probably do a Google search, for instance, and get Dave Ramsey, some financial gurus or whatever out there. But ultimately, it really comes down to that gut feeling. How much do you really want to spend on your house payment for one? How much have you been saving for your down payment? And then really imagine being under contract at a certain price point. You're going to have to pay that loan back at some point in time. So for me, when I bought my house, I didn't want to buy anything higher than $450,000. That might be too much for you or too little for you or whatever. That was just my wife's and I's do not exceed.
I agree with that. And as a realtor, I also want to mention you have to take in consideration earnest money and closing costs. So even though you're doing your big broad budget, make sure to keep those in mind.
And not to mention, if you forget to earmark money for closing costs, somebody like Katie with your financial preparation, can negotiate closing costs to be paid for by the seller. So don't, let the lack of maybe having a few extra $1,000s inhibit you from at least getting in the field and testing the waters to see if you can become a homeowner.
Now, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Leave anything in the comments that you want to know more about. Bob and I are happy to help.
See you soon.